interesting to hear Bruce speak about sustainability, but I should also hand it over to Human because I'm not officially in charge of this project anymore.
No further comments, but thank you. I'll get more information from you about the calculator.
Greta, we have an online question about basically just what does purchasing backhaul mean? So for those of us that are online that maybe aren't familiar with community networks, if you could run through quickly what that means.
Great, backhaul. Great question. So the networks that we're building, they are pretty small. They're about like a downtown, like a neighborhood business district size. They're sort of like Wi-Fi corridors. And so what happens is, it's fairly easy to put routers up on rooftops and create an intranet, meaning not an internet, but an intranet, where you have connectivity among those pieces of equipment, those routers that are on the rooftops, those radios. And you can also have a local server and host content on a server, and you can communicate within that space or that area. When you actually want to get on the global internet, you want to access, your Google or Facebook or whatever services you want to get to on the internet, the global internet, then you have to go through an internet service provider. And the issue is that in any given area, there are limited options for internet service. And oftentimes, let's say you're like, I really can't stand X telecom company, and I'm not going to mention any because you know why. But you decide, like, I don't like their practices, there's only one or two options in this neighborhood, then you're kind of stuck because some areas of New York have one provider that has fiber or cable into the area, some have two, a few have three, not that many. And so getting from your neighborhood community network out to the internet is a trick. And there are some really great newish, I'd call them enterprise service providers, like Stealth Communications in New York City, and Brooklyn Fiber. What else? Pilot Networks. So there are some sort of indie providers that are coming up, and we would love to be able to purchase backhaul from these providers and to work out terms of service with them that we're happy with. But if you end up purchasing from one of the typical incumbent big service providers, they're going to pass on whatever terms they have, which includes, for example, that they can do anything they want with your data at any time. You're going to pass that on to whoever's using the network on the end user, right? Do you guys see what I mean? Does that answer? Does anybody else have questions about backhaul, what that is, how it works? No.
I think that's a good summary. Thank you. Yeah. So next up, we have Bruce Lincoln, co-founder of Silicon Harlem.
Thanks a lot. Hello? Is it working? So you can hear me okay? Yeah. So thanks for pulling this together, Joly. It's always good when what you do is bring together the disparate groups that are here in the city who have a real grassroots commitment to technology from a humanistic standpoint. And I also want to thank John from Brooklyn Law School as far as hosting this. And I got to give a shout out to Greta, who's a tremendous leader in this space, both from the understanding on the technology level, but also a kind of spiritual level that's been brought to this work, because it has to move past simply talking about routers and technology. But with that, I'm going to talk about technology from this sort of standpoint of how we're trying to address issues in communities. And, you know, let me tell you a little bit about my company. My company is Silicon Harlem. And, okay. So my company is Silicon Harlem, and we were founded in 2013 to address the issues of the oncoming digital economy and making sure that this time around it did not leave Harlem behind. And in focusing on Harlem, we looked at that as an important model that could then be applied to the South Bronx, or to Brooklyn, or to Newark, or to Baltimore, or to Atlanta, or even to urban areas outside of the United States. And it's myself, my partner, Clayton Banks. We've been at this for some time now, but in the last 2 years, we've sort of found this convergence. It's both, you know, on the heartfelt level, but on what we can do with technology in the fact that we're working with the RISE network, which is tremendous project because it resonates on so many issues that have to do with people and where people live and the things that people do on a day-to-day basis, and what can happen when you develop technology from that standpoint. And one of the things that I want to make clear, because I'm going to then get into some of the next generation internet products that we're working on, is the next generation internet is the community internet. And I mean that not simply from this sort of conceptual idea, but actually from the way in which the internet itself is going to be re-architected. And if you look at from the initial sort of internet projects back, going maybe into the 80s or early 90s when a lot of folks weren't on it, it began as sort of an educational internet, the NREN, if people remember that, National Research and Education Network. It then, in 98, at the same time Larry Irving identified the digital divide, which still bedevils us, we had the commodity internet, right? .com started springing forward, as well as some .orgs here in New York, which are still around doing great work like Mouse. But we had the commodity internet. They figured out how to, you know, build the Googles and the Amazons and the Yahoos. And then we had the social internet, the revolution that came about with the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. Well, the next generation internet, in my estimation, is the community internet. The internet built from the community back to the internet. And how that's happening is we're starting to do things like make sure that fiber networks are in communities. So how that's happening from an initiative and business standpoint in the city of New York, tied into some of the things Josh was alluding to, is Link NYC. Link NYC was an idea of how do you take all of these payphones and then use them to move the gigabit internet into communities. And one of the things that we advocated for is to ensure that communities were first. Harlem actually has more Link NYC kiosks per capita than any other community. You see Link NYC kiosks running all along 3rd Avenue in East Harlem, which is very important. And the other reason for that is that backbone is the means whereby this high-speed internet goes into the South Bronx. You know, so this didn't happen just based on altruism. This happened because there were very real conversations with a lot of different stakeholders pushing for these things. So it was this idea that I call engineering for equity. You bring an advanced understanding of the internet and what it entails as far as infrastructure, functionality, but you have this unwavering commitment to how it has to serve the community. And so we're starting to see that, and we're at that inflection point here in New York. One of the things that we've been working on is not only working with RISE and with the city, but also working with an unprecedented coalition of advanced universities doing next generation research. So what we have happening at this point in time in Harlem, and let me frame it this way. Harlem is now the test bed for the advanced wireless activity that will be shared across this large-scale network of organizations under the National Science Foundation. It's called POWER. It's Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research. And the first 2 projects funded in the country were Harlem. It's called Cosmos, which is some crazy acronym they developed at Columbia. I forgot what it means. But it's taking place in Harlem, not only along West Harlem, where you have a hub at Columbia and a hub at City College, but also all the way over to 7th Avenue into Central Harlem, where we're making sure that it will look at the schools and we'll look at the NYCHA houses. So that's an unprecedented, if you will, idea. And what made this different was this project had to have a real community, not simply focus, but involvement. So you couldn't just have these boilerplates that they send out to the community boards or to the community school district. They had to be real letters that showed that there had been real outreach, both from, in this instance, since it was in Harlem, Columbia, but as well from what we do at Silicon Harlem around community engagement. Community engagement was a real part of this proposal. There was an extended community engagement strategy that had to be in this otherwise highly technical proposal. And this community element is what won and attracted it to Harlem. Tying also into that is Eager. Eager is where we're using the infrastructure from the Link NYC kiosk to look at how we can piggyback on that and build a community fiber network. Once again, is looking at this idea of how do we look at alternative means to address the backhaul issue that Greta identified, and do it in an alternative fashion, but using very high-end resources, such as the expertise that sits at a Columbia, the resource that you can get from an NSF, once again, driving it from the standpoint of a community-based social venture, and we're a for-profit company, but that brings this type of expertise to bear on behalf of the community. Over top of that, so we've got Eager connecting to Power, but within that, we also have a Smart and Connected Communities project. Once again, it had to have a real community involved. And what that focuses on is not simply smart cities, talking about data and how cool it is to improve certain things on behalf of the city, but it emanates from the community. So an important part of that in the language of NSF was a socio-technical component. Let me translate that for you. What that is Fordham Law School is now looking at community governance from the grassroots level that basically also informs all the design and development that's happening with our engineering partners at UVA, our next generation fiber partners at University of Arizona. So built into all of these projects is a very real community component that then looks at people as if they have something to say about this. And, you know, one of the things that happens is this technology stuff gets so abstracted from people, it gets weird. So, you know, if you know people, for instance, at the community board, and you're involved with the community board, and you're involved with community school districts, you look at these people as people, right? They have educations, they have aspirations, what they want to do. One of the things that happens at the university, I'm not saying this in a negative way, I'm saying this because it's real, and I'm a fellow at Columbia as well. Things like where we have to bring people from, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody, but we have to bring folks from Columbia, and of course they're part of the community, but they're not like the day-to-day folks who are doing certain things, and then put them in a community board meeting, where all of a sudden they're shocked that they're talking to people who have educational backgrounds from schools similar to themselves, have issues that they think need to be addressed in the community, have very real concerns. So this bridge isn't just simply one of making the technology work in the community, it's one of making that those who are the technologists and the researchers understand that people in the community are people, just like themselves. They're not subjects, they're not objects. So it's still those sorts of issues that need to be negotiated so that what you start to have is this kind of very real world means whereby these technologies can be deployed in the community. Now, on another side of things, because East Harlem is kind of like a whole other dimension from Central Harlem and West Harlem, we're very focused on East Harlem, and that's through the RISE project. But similarly to where there were no successes made, and Greta can tell you this was the truth, until what we learned was to talk in a language that resonated with the local people. We were so excited to go in and go door to door and talk about Wi-Fi networks and all this cool stuff. People were like, get out of my store. It's the truth. They're like, and they use colorful language. They weren't polite. It took us a year to find the right language that then would resonate with local people. And it wasn't simply the language. Once again, as I'm telling you how we had to bring the Columbia folks down into the hood, if you will, we had to go into East Harlem. We had to do a community event. We had to find the right partners who understood what was going on with the community. Now we're welcoming the community. We were just on 116th between 3rd and 2nd today walking around, and people are very welcoming to us. But it took a year to build this sort of level of trust. And I'm not just talking about trust from the standpoint of network authentication. I'm talking about trust in a humanistic fashion. And so one of the things that we're finding increasingly is that, there has to be a humanism that informs this work. And it has to be a real connection to the people in the community where you're hearing what they're saying. And that is ongoing work. We recently had a researcher come from UVA, nice guy, got the best of intentions. He didn't know how to talk to folks in the community, though he was polite and everything, because there's some idea that the community is abstracted from the network or from the university or from people's experience. And not that there are folks who were like, going to school, driving cars. So that's where we've got to do the work. So we want to have, these amazing technological projects, but we also need to develop what I call the technique, the skills and the know-how. Not simply that I can build a software-defined radio or I can build an advanced fiber network, but how do you then connect to people in a way where what you're doing really resonates with the things that they aspire to achieve in their community? And so with that, let me wrap up. Any questions?
Sivasubramaniam from Internet Society India, Chennai. When you talked about Harlem being the test bed for the next generation wireless technology, what kind of bandwidth to the end user are you talking about?
We're trying to push the gigabit level.
Okay.
And the fiber network itself is platformed at 10 gigs.
Okay.
But we're trying to push 5G and beyond. But it depends also as well on the application.
All
Now,
right.
of course, because people consume video, that's one of the things that drives the need for bandwidth. Email doesn't really require that much bandwidth, but we're also trying to cover large areas. Harlem over Manhattan is the size of the city of Atlanta.
Yes, over large areas, is it possible to achieve to a certain extent higher bandwidth over Wi-Fi without using cables, without using wire to a certain extent?
Than Wi-Fi. Though you could use Wi-Fi as your handoff into people's homes, but you're now looking at point-to-point wireless, wireless fiber, and so there are gigabit wireless technology as well. A lot of that is embedded in the architecture of the kiosk that NYC uses. So it's 10 gigs
All right.
Okay. We're running, 45 minutes behind. I want to thank you, Bruce. That's great work you're doing, and I'd really like to come up to Harlem and do an event just on power to learn more about it. Get the Columbia guys, bring in, or do a webinar, find out what's going on with that.
Okay,
we
that sounds
we did stream the launch from DC, so we've been on it. We've been on it. So to catch up, we're going to skip the NYC mesh video, which you can see if you just Google state of the mesh. There's a whole, we did an event here, they did an event here in January, and it's all there. It's very informative. I'm fortunate that neither Zach or Brian could be here today. I want to just give a mention to Jane, who was, an eminence Greece behind the funding for their supernode, which really moved them from, just a small network into a real network, and say that, it's a shame that Brian's not here, because when you talk to him about backhaul, he says, well, we just connect to the internet. We just go in to an IXP, and the IXP hooks us into, they peer with Cloudflare, they peer with whoever, and they have internet, and they don't get why everybody else is complaining about it. Do you want to just briefly address this, Jane?
You had me laughing there on just jumping into the IX. We know DKIX well, who they actually are connected with. It's the exchange out of Germany that built a node in New York. But yeah, backhaul, as everyone has been saying this afternoon, is the key issue. We also see it everywhere. And I just want to say thanks to the Silicon Harlem discussion, because I was laughing here in Washington. It is exactly what we see overseas. And I would love to, I think it would be a great idea, Joly, to do another one of these with the team there. So we can also let folks know around the world that this is happening in urban centers and it's doable. And anyway, with backhaul issues, it's the key issue we're seeing. It's also one of the big showstoppers for a lot of networks. And it's a question of how you can set up those partnerships, because it is about building those trust networks. And I couldn't agree more. And it was fascinating to hear about power as well, because we know some folks out in California and Oregon who are trying to apply for grants for the NSF grants. And really, it's amazing to see the government-funded projects actually funding, focusing on that human element, because you can't ignore it. That's what we've also seen with internet exchange points. None of this can work without that embedded. The tech, of course, is critical, but backhaul is and back to the backhaul question, depends on how you partner up and where you can get that connectivity. We know the team in Rhizomatica in Oaxaca, Mexico, awesome 2G, open source network, using the open cellular concept from Endaga, which was purchased by Facebook, but is now being deployed also as some technology free to different projects, kind of like what Melissa's doing with Airband. It's one of the key issues. And if we could work on some public-private partnership funding to ask cities and municipalities to look at some of that public backhaul, that could be a way to also do it. But I would also defer to everyone there in the room who knows better how to set those projects up on the public-private side. We've done it with other countries, but obviously here in the US, there are some other things you'd have to think about. But if we could look at some of the best practices that I know came out of Detroit and what's going on in New York, this would be an amazing thing to share with colleagues around the world who are doing this and who are just getting started. So I'm really grateful for the discussion here today. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so next we have Stuart Reed and Doug Frazier, hopefully. well, we have Stuart.
Okay, well, I'm going to sit here just in case Doug does return. I'm Stuart Reed. I'm the co-chairman, along with my partner, Doug Frazier, of the Digital Divide Partnership. Doug and I have been involved in building and operating community networks for quite a while, actually for some 30 years, if you can believe that. We started out in cable TV back in the mid-'80s, when the cable operator that had the franchise for the Bronx and most of Brooklyn, Cablevision, decided to redline the minority and low-income communities. We thought that was a travesty. The city fought it, but they had to essentially roll over. We went to the city and told them, asked them for a franchise, told them we'd go into the low-income communities first and begin to build those networks. They gave us a lot of lip service. It took us about 5 years. We finally did get a franchise, but in the meantime, we began building a community network in the mid-'80s, headquartered in the basement of a public housing project. We utilized folks from the community to build the network. We used folks from the community to actually build the network, to help operate the network. And it was state-of-the-art at the time, fully addressable. You guys may not know some of the cable terms, but this was back in 86, 87. Folks were actually coming over from Harlem to see the pay-per-view events that we had in our little cable system in the South Bronx. As technology evolved, we did as well. Fast forward, we finally did get a broadband franchise from the city of New York. After a lot of kicking and screaming, they finally realized that they had to kind of acknowledge the low-income communities. We began in the early 2000s to deploy a VDSL network, fiber optic base, fiber to the building, and from there we used the existing copper networks. We built a network in partnership with a local community development agency in the South Bronx, Sobro at the time. And there was a 40-building complex in a community in the South Bronx. Diego Beekman was the name of the complex, still is. And we built a VDSL network, provided triple play, voice, video, and phone. And this was before Time Warner and Cablevision actually launched their triple play here in New York City. We were little guys, so we didn't get a whole lot of play. Dave Burstein, who couldn't make it here, wrote us up, but other than that, we didn't get a whole lot of play. Later, we got written up in IEEE and some other publications for really being kind of on the cutting edge. You might imagine it was difficult to get the financing to sustain that operation at the time, so we were eventually eclipsed by the big guys. But we thought we had a really positive model of how the community can build, control, and operate a community network. One key part of that network, the VDSL network, was we created a learning center where folks learned about the digital skills and learned about how to operate a computer. One of the things that we also did was once the folks took the class, they got a free computer. It actually worked. As I was kind of preparing what I wanted to talk about today, a number of folks told me, well, Stu, don't talk about all the social stuff and the educational stuff. Focus on the network stuff. And I thought about that. I'm a new board member to ISOC New York. I've only been on the board about 6 months, so I'm kind of just feeling my way around. But I realized that what Doug and I have been doing for the last 20, 30 years now is a really holistic approach to community networks. You can't just go in and talk about technology. You can't just build a network and expect that people will come and people will use it, particularly in our communities. So there are a couple overarching notions that have driven us and the development and kind of the mission statement of the Digital Divide Partnership, and also what I'm going to talk about in a minute, our Streaming University project. The first is just a fundamental reality of our communities here in New York City. I grew up in public housing in Cleveland. My partner Doug grew up in public housing here in Harlem. When you look at the public housing community in New York City, it's a population of nearly 600,000 folks. Larger than the city of Boston, larger than the city of Atlanta, as large as the entire state of Vermont. Yet how are those folks doing? They're not doing well at all. 50% of that community is unemployed. The average income is $23,000, below the poverty line. Folks are struggling. We heard some earlier statistics. Someone, I'm not sure if it was Greta or one of the folks, talked about a recent study that said 20 to 25% of New York City didn't have internet access. Well, in public housing, it's more like 45 to 50% of the folks don't have internet access at home. Now, poor communities, black and brown communities, are kind of ahead of the curve with smart devices, but in terms of internet access at home, computers, productivity tools, we are way behind the curve. So this is a stark reality that we looked at. And what we have kind of concluded is that the biggest need in our communities is income generation. And we believe and that the internet is one of the most transformative tools to help address that problem. So, one, income generation. That's a huge piece. The other core value that kind of drives our whole operation is that we have to put the community first. We have to build them into our model, and this is something that we've done. We don't decide, okay, this is what we think the community should have. We actually build them into the model of what we provide. We have, they are part of the owners, they're part of the producers, they help build our networks. So essentially, the networks that we build are community owned and operated. In many ways, some of the stuff that Bruce talked about, some of the stuff that Greta talked about, some of the stuff that Jane talked about, you know, I see in many ways New York City, in particular, some of the underserved communities that I'm talking about, look very much like some of the third world communities where folks don't know how to use the internet. They don't know why they should have the internet. One of the debates that I hear that's been talked about is we need affordable internet. Well, what is affordable to folks that are unemployed? What is affordable to folks whose average income is $23,000? This is family income, not individual income. So what we've decided is that what is affordable is free internet. So we provide free access in the communities that we service, and along with the training, one of the key aspects is we've used the internet in a number of, I'm now kind of segueing to our Streaming University project. Let me just give you a quick background on that. We are partnered with the City College of New York, with One Economy, who you guys might remember was very active back in the early 2000s. And in 2009, we got a New York State grant to build a hybrid fiber wireless network in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, and in Harlem. We did that with those community partners. One Economy, Sobro, who I mentioned earlier, was in there. And we built these networks. At its peak, they had almost 400 nodes. As a result of that partnership with City College, we evolved, partnering with the college and with the radio station, WHCR 90.3 FM, what we call what became the Streaming University Project. This is a public-private partnership, an initiative that includes not just the college, not just us, but key community anchor institutions that have come together to help provide network access throughout the community. One of the key projects that kind of helped propel this was, and a number of people, including the RISE Network and others, have talked about it, and that was Superstorm Sandy. When Sandy occurred, what happened in Harlem was there was a dearth of information as to what's going on in Harlem, what's going on in public housing. There are folks out in Far Rockaway that had to swim out of their 6 and 7-story apartments just to get to safety. There was no communication, there was no information. So what we decided in partnership with City College and their FM station was to create something we called WEBT, which was a WHCR emergency broadcast team. So what we have done is we partner with local folks in the community to collect and disseminate information so that in an emergency, we are communicating back and forth with the radio station. we developed a way to remotely control the radio station so that if folks can't get in, that was one of the problems during Superstorm Sandy, the on-air personalities couldn't get to the station. So we developed a way to remotely go in and control the programming and talk on air. We've developed relationships with folks throughout the community to feed us information. We've started to build networks that have backup power, solar and battery powered access points in the community so that in the event of power failure, we still can collect information. And someone mentioned earlier, they were talking about intranets. Well, our network also operates even when the internet goes down. We're able to communicate with each other, among each other, and share this emergency information. So this is a key outgrowth of that project. Another thing that we developed was something that we call community streaming stations, where we have developed local broadcast capability in, again, this is in public housing for the most part. That's our sweet spot from where we sit. Those are the folks most in need. We're working with community resident associations, with community groups to develop community streaming stations where they are creating their own programming, creating their own content, feeding that content out over the network to each other, among each other, not only during emergencies, which is kind of how it developed, but also during normal times, during non-emergency times, news and information on a community basis. So for us, just kind of, you know, I guess summarizing, I see Joly standing over me, and we must be running short on time. For us, the key with what the power of the internet is in the applications and the services, how they can empower, how they can enrich, and in particular, how they can generate income. We look for entrepreneurs, we look for young and old people in the community. Doug and I spent almost 15 years with venture capital folks back in the 80s and 90s, some of the leading minority VC guys around the country out of Harvard MBAs. So we learned a lot about business development and entrepreneurship. So that's one of the key things that we look to focus on in the communities that we serve, identifying folks, helping with local business development, using the technology as a community development tool. That's our focus, and we think that's where the need is greatest in our communities. I invite you to check out our websites at DDP-NY, DigitalDividePartnersNY.org, and also WHCREBT.org. That's WHCREBT.org. That's our emergency preparedness information. It has live streaming from the community, from the radio station, and again, that's a way for the community to stay connected with each other and with sources of information about what's going on in their communities. I guess that's it for now. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Stuart. And if we had more time, I'd ask you a question about how phones versus, you know, laptops or whatever affected your work, but we don't have time for that today. But I would love to come up to the Bronx and do a whole event on what you do, and, you know, and stream it and everything. And you know, your talk puts me in mind of a couple of things, like when they were delegating the .nyc top-level domain, you know, Tom, who's also on our board, had this idea of making local wikis, and eventually they reserved names, and they're putting out these neighborhood reserved names. And this is something to me which would work very well with what you're doing. And the other thing that is, you know, I also like to stream. You know, I do a bit of it. And and so today, apart from this, I'm also streaming the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum from Suriname. And Bernadette Lewis, who is a very impressive lady, did a presentation today where she talked about, you know, about resilience, about the same thing. And what she called for was education of kids to run ham radio stations, you know, and it's something that, you know, I think that the Internet Society should get behind, Jane. Okay. Thank you very much.
I should say, Joly, that we're looking at community radio as well because it's an imperative in some of the disaster-prone regions.
So next on our agenda is Shiva. So I've known Shiva for a number of years. He is the chair of the Internet Society chapter in Chennai, He's also the sort of prime mover behind the Core Internet Values Dynamic Coalition at the IGF. And you know, I've listed him as an outsider view because, as you saw before, he's asking the most basic questions. And Shiva, we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but we'd like to just hear, you know, a few thoughts from you. 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm not here to present anything, more to ask a question. So the community networks, the work that is done in US and other countries is quite impressive and quite inspiring. But this has all been on a scale, on a small scale, small communities. My question is about scalability. One of the problems that I'm repeatedly hearing from everyone is about backhaul, about the situation where you have to eventually go to a ISP whose objectives are more commercial and who might see this as a adverse development. So how do we break that, and how do we scale this? How do we scale this community networks to a much larger level, whereas the whole city is connected, where everybody has bandwidth that is liberal, that has about 100 megabits of data and so on. So what kind of business model do we develop to go towards that? I was thinking considerably about that, and I hope to work with some of the people who are working on community networks and maybe share some views. Since I'm given 5 minutes of time, I'm not able to elaborate, but in the course of the event this afternoon, if you could address the question of scalability and how do we break the deadlock on bandwidth, it'll be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiva. And Jane will tell you that India was in fact the first pioneering country in community networks and started projects in 2010, which moved up into Nepal. And when they had the big earthquake in Nepal, our chapter there hooked up a lot of people that were otherwise unconnected. And so next we've got Bruce Kushnick. Well, no, Bruce, you're now.
Oh, I'm now.
Yeah. You know, I know you've been trying to like get out of it.
No, not at all.
Welshing on your commitments.
Me? Never. I thought it would be safer.
So there it is.
Okay.
Select to decide what happens to this drive.
Should play it.
Open folder to view files.
Yeah. Only one file.
Okay, that's all yours.
Which way is forward? Next slide?
Yeah, I would say you go into like slideshow.
Okay, how do I do next slide?
Dustin, can you just help him get going here?
I just need first slide, next slide. How do you do the next slide?
Yeah, but can you make him full screen?
Okay.
Here you go, Bruce. It's the best.
Right, which way? Good. Hi, my name is Bruce Kushnick. I'm the Executive Director of New Networks Institute, and I'm also the Managing Director of the Regulators, which is a group of lawyers, auditors, experts who've come together to work on various projects together. There's 2 former FCC senior staffers as part of the group. We believe community networks are critical to the growth of the internet, because they serve purposes. They are competition to the incumbents. They serve unserved areas. They also have a sense of community. But I'm here to give you a little history lesson on what happened in the United States and what we think should happen next. I have some creds in this area. Just so you know, first in 2012 we helped get 2 small towns, Stowe Creek and Greenwich, New Jersey, wired with fiber optics based on the state law. And in 2013 we helped Fire Island get upgraded to fiber. In 2015, our research ended up being used in North Carolina to help get small communities in the Appalachians wired. In 2018, we're working with the District of Columbia Citizen Utility Board, and we're working with a group called 1 Million New Internet Users in LA, in California, who does broadband and digital divide issues. I should mention that the 1 Million New Internet Users does education in Hispanic areas to give people digital tools in schools, teach teachers how to teach the digital technology and how to get parents to understand how to use the technology. There's also, just so you know, there's a proposed settlement with Verizon New York that's current, of which Verizon has agreed in principle to fix deteriorating networks and to supply 10,000 lines in unserved areas of fiber optics currently. I'll get back to the proposed settlement. We are against this settlement. So I was speaking to a reporter and he suggested that I make an offer. If you take the blue pill, which is from the Matrix, you will find that tomorrow you won't remember my name and you won't remember that you were at the event. If you take the red pill, you'll be hearing the truth about what happened in broadband in the United States. Most people do not know the history of broadband in the United States, so I should probably give you a sort of overview. Let's see. In 1992, the Clinton-Gore campaign called something the information superhighway, and it was a plan to rewire America with a fiber optic cable that would replace the existing copper state utility wires that were put in as part of the state utility, some of which were put in the 1920s, 1930s. Most of America was finished, by the way, in the 1960s. By 2010, 100% of the United States was supposed to be completed with a fiber optic cable that was supposed to be in urban, suburban areas completely, and it was supposed to also have speeds of at least 45 megabits in both directions. In New Jersey, for example, Verizon New Jersey is supposed to have 100% of the state completed by the year 2010 with a 45 megabit service that was capable in both directions. And in California, Pacific Bell was supposed to have 5.5 million homes finished by the year 2000 and spend $16 billion. The Stowe Creek in Greenwich in New Jersey that I mentioned to you basically was part of a state law that was changed, and that's why we were able to get them wired. But there was also a federal plan called the video dial tone, where the phone companies applied with the FCC to go out and rewire the states. This is all from starting in 1992. New York did have a plan. This is part one of the broadband plans for America. This is New York. This is from a report that was given to the state of New York in 1992 by now is Verizon New York, and it said that they would have 16% of the state pretty much finished with a fiber optic wire, of which 24% of the end parts of the state would be done, and this is by the year 2000. Now you should know in all of these plans, state laws were changed to give the companies more money to be able to fund these broadband networks. At the same time, in 1996, there was the Telecommunications Act. The Telecommunications Act was designed to take the existing networks and open them up to direct competition, so that any company, internet provider, any broadband provider, any cable provider, or any phone provider could use those wires. And in New York, by 2001, there were 9,335 internet providers in the United States offering service to the majority of America. And in New York City, area codes 212 and 718, according to the Boardwatch directory, in 2001, there were 331 separate internet providers offering community services. You may know some of these names: B-Way, Panix. Many of these companies, and those companies are still around and limping, except for the fact that most of the companies were essentially put out of business. The FCC from 2000 to 2004 decided that those pesky competitors were really not necessary. We would just have the large cable companies go after the large phone companies, and that would be it. So, how did they do this? How did they get rid of There were 7,000 small internet providers that were put out of business by the year 2006. What happened was as follows. The FCC decided that broadband, which was a Title II service, always, as part of the Telecom Act, would be joined with the internet service, which was an information service, and that those two things would both be called an information service, or as I put it, a glob. This killed off line sharing, which allowed this small internet providers to use the wire to offer their own DSL. This put AT&T and MCI up for sale because they weren't allowed to resell any of the products anymore. And essentially what happened was they handed over the business to the ISPs. Today, when you hear the word ISP, you don't think of the small internet providers that started the internet. You actually think of the large companies that took over the business. So in fact, the mergers which happened, there was a bunch of them, turned into essentially Humpty Dumpty, where AT&T, Verizon, and CenturyLink are the remaining companies that pretty much took over most of the telecommunications in the United States. However, this is part two. So the end of part one, from 1992 to 2004, the phone companies claimed that they were going to rewire America. 50% of the United States should have been finished by the year 2000. The companies collected billions of dollars per state to go out and do the wiring and didn't do it. But they were very persistent and said, no, we're going to start all over again. So I'll return to New York. 2005, Verizon goes to the state commission and says, you know, we really are going to do this new fiber optic stuff. Fiber to the home, FTTP. And by the way, we want this to be part of the state utility as Title II common carrier network that was based on the Communications Act of 1934. This is in state law right now. Just so you know, today, broadband, the FTTP, the fiber to the home, fiber to the premises, is classified as Title II, which is a little strange when you think about the fact that net neutrality claims that Title II doesn't exist and we should get rid of it. But there's one other thing you probably don't know. In 2005, Verizon also said, you know, we're going to need more money to build this network. So why don't you give us some rate increases? There were 3 rate increases in New York City, 84%. So by the year 2009, Verizon did a 3rd rate increase where it said, quote, this is for massive deployment of fiber optics. Now, this is the POTS, regular phone lines, paying for the fiber optic networks, which are Title II. If they were not Title II, you wouldn't be allowed to charge grandma, low-income families, people in all the communities in New York that still have the regular copper wires for the networks. The amount of money that was charged to local phone customers is somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 extra for this one thing. But in 2010, something happened. In 2010, Verizon basically said, you know, we're going to be a wireless-only company. We're going to take the wires that we're building that are part of the state utility, and the budgets for those wires to upgrade, we're going to just move it to the wireless company. Here's Fran Shamo, the former CFO of Verizon, who basically said, the fact of the matter is wire capital, and I don't have the numbers, but it's pretty substantial, is being put into the wireline side of the business for the wireless growth. The IP backbone, the data transmission, the fiber to the cell site, these are on the wireline books, i.e. they are a part of the state utility cost. So the reason why most of New York was never finally upgraded to fiber optics is because in 2010, Verizon said, we're not doing this anymore, and it moved the budget, the capital budgets, to the wireless company. Which brings me to the proposed settlement. In 2013, Alex Goldman, a former Brooklyn Law School student, and I wrote a report calling for an investigation of Verizon New York's financials, which are based on the fact that Verizon in New York actually publishes financials. And the finding of one of the consultants found that there was massive cross-subsidies, misallocation of expenses and revenues to the detriment of the New York operations, i.e. that they were transferring the financials of the state utility and using it for other lines of business. This is documented. So here's what's happened in New York. Verizon basically has taken all of the money for the core of the wired networks, the state utility networks, and basically used it as a cash cow, charging local phone customers to pay for all the other lines of business. Now, gets out of hand when you find out, well, I'll come back to this for a second. So this is probably the most fun part of the conversation, zombie rules. So here's what happened. It turns out that the cost allocations, the way that all the expenses get divided up in the state utilities, is based on the FCC's cost accounting rules. Now, the reason why it's zombie rules is because the FCC's accounting rules were removed in 2007, but the state of New York and Verizon still use those same rules, and they have become distorted. It basically charges 60% of all expenses are basically charged now to the local state utility, i.e. local phone customers, that the majority, that Verizon has been losing $1 billion a year since 2010. Guess you guys didn't know that. But those are basically artificial losses because basically the copper-based local service was charged $1.4 billion in the year 2016 based on Verizon's own annual reports filed with the state, of which the copper networks only spent between $75 and $100 million on maintenance. And there was $733 million dropped into Verizon New York's budget for corporate operations, which is the executive pay, the corporate jet, and all the other expenses. So let me go back to this one thing here. Now everybody's going to say, but everybody's going to say, but everybody's going wireless. Well, the wireless networks require backhaul, as everybody pointed out. We're currently in court against the FCC's decision about the special access backhaul. In New York, the backhaul was $2 billion collected by Verizon New York, of which it didn't pay most of these expenses, making it very profitable for the company. However, Verizon shows zero number of lines. Here's what's going on with the number of lines that you've been heard about. We're losing all these lines, we're losing all these lines. Actually, these lines here are what's really going on. The lines for the special access, of which $2 billion of revenue, there's no accounting of any of the lines in New York. There's no accounting of the lines for DSL. There's no accounting for the lines to the cell sites. So there is a current settlement going on. We are against the current settlement. On May 31st, Verizon New York's 2017 financial report comes out, which we believe will show all the billions of dollars of losses. So we believe that community networks must start first at asking some basic questions. There's a critical path, which is accountability. How much money was charged to local phone customers? Accountability, where's all the cross subsidies and all the money going to the wireless? Accountability, if we want New York City upgraded, why shouldn't those financials be given to separate subsidiaries? It shouldn't. So our belief is the bottom line to it all is that at this point in time, the wires under our feet should be able to be accessed by customers, including all the backhaul. And the backhaul should be at the same cost that Verizon's own subsidiaries are using it, which would mean you're getting it mostly for free. Because at this point in time, Verizon's wireless company is basically being charged to the wireline division. Verizon Wireless is paying a fraction of the cost. Finally, net neutrality. If the networks are Title II, if customers paid for all the networks, then how does this directly contradicts what the FCC has suggested about net neutrality? The bottom line is that the FCC's entire system of all the proceedings has a systematic flaw, of which they have not looked at anything I've mentioned here. They look at no state, intra-state expenses, revenues, commitments, ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Would you like your flash drive?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Questions? I think I sent them.
All right, so thank you for that. Our next speaker is Michael J. Santarelli, Director of the Advanced Communications Law and Policy Institute from the New York Law School.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the ISOC-NYC Brooklyn Law School for organizing this. I'm a member also of the Federal Communications Bar Association New York chapter, which I think is a nominal partner sponsor in this. So, but ISOC and everyone else gets all the credit. I shoehorned my way into a speaking slot, I guess, somehow. But it's good to be here. I guess a key takeaway, for me at least, in hearing from especially all the folks working here in the city, is that New Yorkers just get shit done when it comes to these issues. I know a lot of progress still remains to be done, but there's just so much going on, and it's really inspiring to always hear. I intentionally used a curse word because my mentor, who I started working with to start my career, Gail Brewer, is never one to hold back when it comes to those sorts of words. Not that she's great in so many ways. So I started my career working for her on all these issues, and I got to meet people like Bruce and Joe and Josh, who was here earlier. Somebody mentioned the Broadband Advisory Committee before. I heard someone saying, I remember working on that legislation when I was at the council with Gail. So these types of conversations have been ongoing for a long time. So many different things have been happening in different parts of the city, but it seems like there's more happening now. And one of the issues that I'm focused on here in New York, for as much as I love working on the wonky regulatory issues like Bruce was talking about before, net neutrality, all the fun stuff. Here in New York City, my passion project has been trying to work with the array of groups I've met over the years who are working on the ground to bring people to the internet and to get them online. Again, in my work with the city before and ever since in my sort of research capacity at New York Law School, I've had the opportunity to meet so many groups, Silicon Harlem, but also groups that work in schools, training students, working with senior citizens, working to connect the older adults. And there's just this rich array of community groups and nonprofits that are really doing the hard work of trying to bring people online. It's either if it's actually building networks to bring people online, or working in a very hands-on way, tailored way with the unconnected to sort of show them the way and give them the skills to do that. And so one of the things I've been working on recently, and this ties into what Josh mentioned before, the city's RFI around kind of pulling together a broadband strategy, I guess, for lack of a better term. One of the things I've been working with an array of folks, Gail, Maya Wiley at the News School, Bruce at Silicon Harlem, and some others into this coalition that we're calling the Digital Equity, Adoption, and Literacy Deal Coalition, and trying to work with the city, the mayor's office, to make sure that these sort of demand side issues are part of the conversation going forward. And what I found most interesting to myself, and this is a great learning opportunity for me, is how even the folks who are building the networks recognize that's not enough just to build it. They're not going to come unless you actually go out and talk to them, train them, show why it's relevant, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's all these different things and approaches going on. The RISE approach is interesting with the Digital Stewards program, the nonprofit groups that I've known for a while and have been working with. Again, have a very more traditional educational digital skills training approach. So what we've been trying to do through this coalition is trying to offer the city ideas in terms of trying to come up with some sort of, I guess, grander vision for pulling all these, or trying to knit all these different approaches together and figuring out a framework, I guess, for leveraging all that's happening in the city at a very grassroots level to inform larger policy initiatives at the city level. So, for example, working with these groups in the communities to gather data about who's online, who's not online, why they're not online, because so much of the data that's been used so far, I think in that Truth NYC, Truth in Broadband report, it's census data, it's FCC data that's outdated in a lot of ways. It's never really that granular. But working in the communities with community groups, potentially you can get that sort of very hands-on data about what's working, what's not, and I'm sure what's working in or not working in Harlem is probably different from what's working and not working out in Brooklyn, Queens, et cetera. So I don't think we want the city having a master blueprint for everything, because as was mentioned, there's no one size fits all for these issues, but coming up with a way to, again, kind of have a citywide vision, looking across all these different programs and figuring out ways to, again, tap into what's going on the ground, but also supporting them in very targeted ways through either channeling city funds, working together corporate or philanthropic funds through the mayor's fund for public-private partnerships, creating other novel partnerships. So again, putting the weight of the city behind these issues, which get overlooked a lot on the demand side, and making sure that they have the same presence as when we're talking about issues on the supply side as well. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I was like learning and hearing about what's been going on here in New York City. I always feel like I'm learning something new, and I'm sure for every person that's here today, there are five other people in communities across the city that are doing interesting things. So hopefully, if folks are interested in trying to work together on these issues as part of the RFI process or more generally, let me know. We can join the coalition that we're trying to build and get as many voices on that as possible. So thank you. Okay.
I've heard a rumor that a lot of the franchises are up in 2019. You used the word leverage, and also, Bruce has got a lot of shit. Some of it could maybe stick at the wall, to open the pipes, which is what he's saying, to give community. What do you think? Is there any way that this can happen, or when will the broadband plan come out in time to make that kind of thing happen?
Oh, well, I'm not going to speak. I don't know about the city's broadband efforts. You can ask Josh that over email, I guess. But I think the franchises are up in 2020. I've heard at the New School event that Greta organizing and co-hosted a couple months ago, that was a big issue around the franchises and what the city can or cannot do and what it should or should not do. It's an interesting issue in a lot of ways, because I think there's lots of dynamics and forces in play, certainly. If 2020 is a presidential election, so if the current administration stays on and the city does something that conflicts with what the FCC, I know, right? No, anything could happen. You never know. So if the current administration stays in place and the same policies stay in place, and the FCC has made clear that they have a very national vision for broadband issues, so whether they were to intervene to say if the city tried to do one thing that conflicted with the FCC's vision, whether they would intervene. Of course, if there's another administration coming in with a different approach, certainly there's possibility that nothing would happen. But from the perspective of actually what the city could or could not do with the franchises, again, I think there's it's almost uncharted territories in a lot of ways. Especially, I've heard different ideas being pitched around about what the city might ask for around certain things, and it's a negotiating process. So if a company is very eager to extend their franchise and they want to stay in New York, then it's a negotiation. So you can come up with terms that they could voluntarily agree to. Whether the city can impose things on a company, I don't know if that would stick in court. What's interesting is, going back to net neutrality issues, that so much of this was actually launched by in the late 90s around the open access debate, when localities tried to impose open access obligations on cable companies, and that kind of launched this whole cycle, a never-ending cycle of net neutrality. What should and should not happen. But from a purely academic standpoint, it'd be an interesting kind of full circle-ness of going back to those sorts of issues. But I can't see the future, and I'm sure the city will try to do many different things, and whether they stick, I don't know.
Yeah, just on franchising, I do think this is an opportunity for us all to be working on it right now. So I would invite, this coalition that's in formation, the Digital Equity Laboratory is very interested in working. Maya Wiley's already a member of this coalition. And so what we need to do in order for the city to have any kind of leveraging position in terms of the franchising, it's all of the cable franchises are up in 2020. We need to start building political pressure right now. And that means looking at all the side letters from the last cable franchise agreements and all the community benefits that were built into those side letters and thinking about what our communities need and coming together to start to make those demands. Ultimately, both the borough presidents and the city council have to sign off. So we have a lot of opportunities to do things locally that build up from the bottom up to pressure the incumbents to, do some things that are good for communities. So we'll be talking more about franchise negotiations and how everybody can get involved. I'm just saying you're going to, Michael. Sorry, I don't know if you are.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you. And maybe it's time to get these slides off the backdrop. And our next speaker is Sharada Srinivasan from the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the research that we have done on community networks in the United States. This is part of a larger stream of work on community networks that we have done, a lot of which has been both under the aegis of the IEEE Internet Inclusion Initiative as part of the evidence-based research group, as well as a research project called the One World Connected Research Project based out of the University of Pennsylvania, which has been supported by a lot of people, including ISOC. Jane has been a super, super supportive person. So has Microsoft. Melissa Sassy was right here, and a huge host of other stakeholders. We are interested in gathering empirical data on trying to understand what the stories of actual community network deployments are. We have collected, amongst community network deployments, we have about 22, which are global, which cover about 12 to 13 countries. The ones that we have in the US are 2. And I'm going to give both of their experiences in an effort to get to what are the things that policy might be missing or what are the things that we can learn for better policy making in this space. So the first story that I'm going to tell you about is that of Little Tokyo Wireless. It is a lapsed community network. It is a community network that existed in 2007 to 2009 in Los Angeles. Which was trying to connect a Japanese-American community in Los Angeles. The community network got a lot of funding from the LA Community Redevelopment Authority to the tune of about $250,000. And it worked well for 2 years, provided free connectivity for about 300 residents in a very small community of Japanese Americans, and then lapsed. The story or why it lapsed is almost as interesting as the story of the fact that it existed. A lot of the funding that this Community Redevelopment Authority was giving out ended by law due to the fact that they changed the city council's. Is this better? Yes, sorry. So there was a change in legislation at the local municipal level that allowed for the funds that were being given earlier to the community network to be taken away. And because they were providing this service for free, and because they were considered a cultural project, because a lot of the community redevelopment was actually being done with respect to the funding was being used to develop some local content on the Japanese American heritage that existed in that area, as well as provide free connectivity through a landing page, which had some of those details for people who were visiting. Changes in legislation pretty much killed that network very, very quickly. And they did not have, or they did not build into their system a non-grant-based source of revenue. This meant that they lost a lot of money very, very quickly in terms of high labor costs that were needed to maintain the network, and they did not have people to maintain the nodes that were running the network in this small town, and it failed. And that has like key lessons in terms of policy making, as well as in terms of the way community networks develop, one of which has already been emphasized, which is that we need to look at different ways of building sustainability into the business that we like, or if not a business, into the work that is being done in order to maintain networks, because it takes labor and it takes like actual people who can like dedicate actual hours of time. And a lot of times that's not really considered by a lot of these communities in a very long-term perspective. So that's something that's one key takeaway from that. The second is also to be able to plan for alternate sources of funding, right? Even if it is grant-based funding, there are different sources that could be tapped into, which like the community network either was not aware of. When we spoke to the founder of this labs network, they suggested that they did not have access to different sources of funding or did not know about the different sources of funding that existed, which means that data on what these sources are might be super crucial to make sure that more and more of this information is made available. The second story that I'm going to talk to you about is one of Native American communities in Southern California being connected. This is called TVDNet, Southern California Tribal Digital Village. Is still a very thriving community network that connects 19 indigenous nations. Matt Frantanen, who's one of the founding members of that network, is a great guy to listen to, but also has done incredible work in connecting Native American communities and bringing their issues in the policy space for like almost 15 years now. So this network started in 2003. In Southern California, in a very mountainous region, where there was like isolated communities that do not have access to, that did not have any kind of access to either cellular connectivity or Wi-Fi connectivity. The network initially started so they use like unlicensed spectrum to connect these communities, and they don't have the federal standards that we currently impose on speed, right? They don't say we need like 1 gigabit speed or like incredibly high speeds. The goal that they set for themselves was reasonable to them, as they claim. They said it was to make sure that every kid in that community or in their communities has access to enough internet connectivity to get to do their homework. So they had a 6 up, 3 down link, which is quite basic, which was enough for them to be able to give access to every school student at their home at prices that we could not imagine if they were to like build a lot more like internet access into the backhaul, right? So they currently provide like a staged plan, which is that you have like a basic service that you get for about $20 a month, and that goes up all the way to $64.99 a month. The speed obviously changes because like of the load that you will consume at $64.99 as opposed to a $20 to a $35 pack. But there are lessons that we can learn from this, and it's been working quite successfully for like almost 15 years now. It started in 2003. It's like grown in size. It started with 1 village. It's now got 19 sovereign nations. It's being run by the Southern California Tribes Association, Tribal Chairmen's Association, which has been an entity that's been like speaking about the issues or taking care of the issues of Native American nations in Southern California since 1962. And the things that we can learn from that experience are twofold. When I spoke to Matt Frantanen for the first time and asked him the question, what are the things that you think are things that other people who are starting in this field should know? He said the first thing is, it's really important to get like an idea of what we are looking for to support, as opposed to just let's build networks for the sake of building networks. Like, it's important to tie that to the kinds of things that networks can do, because it builds buy-in for people to be able to invest their resources and their time in maintaining that network and building that network, especially if they're a community network, but also that we make sure that there is a model that like keeps that network running, right? It shouldn't be based on the one person, and once that person goes away or dies, they aren't able to like sustain that effort anymore. So creating that structure, it could be, as Jane said earlier in the day, through the fact that they incorporate as an NGO, or it could be just that they have a dedicated structure or a hierarchy that makes sure that people are able to have specific responsibilities and roles that can sustain that network. It's the other thing is also that you do need revenue, right? It doesn't have to be a profit-making entity, but you need revenue to just sustain and pay for backhaul. And the last thing that they emphasized, and both community networks had, was the role of partnership. So the Southern California Tribal Chairman's Association had this really innovative partnership with the state libraries, which allowed them to get backhaul for quite lesser prices than they would have otherwise, because they were able to tap into the funding sources that state libraries get, which otherwise you would not be able to do as a sovereign nation, because the sovereign nations under the broadband plans don't get, as I understood it, don't get the same status in terms of their ability to apply for funding or apply for grants, which means that it needs to be innovatively thought about in terms of how you reach out to different pockets of partners, and how you can get access to resources to be able to sustain networks. The second thing is with Little Tokyo Wireless, the community network that lapsed, it had a very long-standing partnership with the LA Community Redevelopment Organization, because it was trying to portray itself as a cultural rejuvenation entity. I think that those kinds of partnerships are also key and are sources that we don't usually think of typically when we think of deploying networks on the ground. So in terms of partnerships, there are the coalition isn't really just network operators or network providers or technical community people. Can often be people that are outside of the traditional telecommunication space, but can often be incredibly useful ways of getting partnerships and build networks that can sustain communities for a long period of time. So those are the two findings that I had that are from the domestic case studies that we've developed. We have got more, and Jane has already mentioned a lot of them. There are some more of these case studies that we have developed that you can find on our website, and I encourage you to check them out and speak to me in case you have more questions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Lindsay, who we'd hoped to have talk now, thanks for that. Thank you very much. Seems to have scarpered, so it's a shame, because she's a very impressive young lady who works for the city and in places like Brownsville and stuff like this, doing really valuable infrastructure work at a very grassroots level. And so maybe we'll get her another time. She did present at the Mozilla Challenge thing a few months back. I wanted to sort of talk about, if I criticized Bruce for talking about the past earlier in the week, but that those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the Internet Society is now in its 26th year. When we were 20 years, we started something called the Internet Hall of Fame. In there, you'll find all these people that basically hooked up their countries from scratch, that built applications from scratch. The guy who invented Archie, the first search engine, was from Barbados. And when they hooked up the schools by having a system of store and forward, we've looked at things that have really changed everything, that are, protocols like BitTorrent or, stuff like this, that there's always room to do things. But I do recommend going back there and just browsing through that thing, because you'll see a lot of people. I'd like to pass it to, and then obviously join the Internet Society if you're not already a member. I'd just like to pass it to Jane for her final thoughts.
I would just say it's also free to join, so we're not trying to get money out of you. But thank you for this event. It's been amazing, and I'm embarrassed to say that I learned a lot about things I should have known about in the US, and I'm going to hit some of you up to come up there and talk to you more, especially the team at Silicon Harlem, about the financing issues, because we're trying to put a paper together for folks that we're working with, and it might be just better to have videos of you or podcasts about what you've done. In any event, thanks so much. I think this was super, and I hope we can do more of these. I don't want to keep talking and interfere, so over back to you, Joly.
Oh, is the camera just on me here? So, first off, thank you all for sharing experiences and thoughts and perspectives. And these kind of convenings and discussions are very important to looking at the different shared issues that we're concerned with and finding a collective and holistic path forward. And I think, that's a good way to look at the multi-stakeholder model, which is an abstraction of bringing together all of the different interested parties that have a vested interest in a particular issue area. But that's how we convene the Internet Governance Forum for the USA, and that's how all of the Internet Governance Forum initiatives convene. And we will be having our event July 27th at CSIS in Washington, D.C. We will have the Joly there to make sure that people can participate remotely, of course. And we will have a session there that will focus on the holistic approach to connectivity from the infrastructure to the economic opportunity, and that's something that I think we heard a lot here today. And kind of in that light, I think that this is a good opportunity to maybe collect closing thoughts from anybody who would like to provide, a sentence or two of what you would like to see taken into this event in the summer. And I would encourage you all to participate during the event, but as I put together a report of this event in the context of the other IGF-USA on the road events that have happened across the country, if there's anything that we would like to see be taken forward into that, I think this is a really good opportunity to open the floor to anybody that has any closing thoughts.
Just a small suggestion. If there is some way by which the experts and the people who are working on community networks, starting with whoever was present in this event, if we can interconnect and share even on a mailing thread or on a mailing list or in some other way, that would exchange a lot of ideas about what problems were solved and how and what kind of problems are to be solved. And that would also help us. We are interested in building a community network.
So I'm going to put this out as a challenge both to ourselves and to highlight the fact that this really still shouldn't exist. 20 years later, why is there still a digital divide?
One thing I wanted to do was introduce Edwin Reed Sanchez. Edwin is I spoke about OtherNet earlier in Bushwick. Edwin works on OtherNet and also has an ISP that actually does cellular connectivity in Nicaragua. So he's a great person to know if you're doing projects in New York City. And
just say that I have a very good video of Edwin at Radical Networks, I think.
Anyway, also that we as a community in New York City, we have a lot of opportunity right now, and I think, between ISOC, the Digital Equity Laboratory, and a lot of the other folks that have spoken today, that we really should be talking more and organizing more. As you said, we have the franchising process that can open up some opportunities. We have the RFI that's still open. And so we should think about some of the things that came up today and how we could work together. For example, on backhaul, internet exchange points. Yeah, maybe other people can think of some of the other things. Sustainability or funding, business models, ongoing, so these are all things that I would love to stay in conversation with folks about. I think there are a number of, other digital equity issues that we can all be talking about. So I will commit to, from the platform of the Digital Equity Laboratory at the New School, to bring folks together and share news. And we'll try to keep people connected as a community. So it's a network of networks. That's the whole principle of the internet.
Anybody else? Oh, we got. Back here. Good. Sorry, we missed you earlier.
No, that's fine. Okay, I'm sorry I missed earlier, but I just wanted to say thank everybody that's here. Stu and I, my partner Stu, we've been doing this for quite a long time, and we're very happy that all of us, that now we have a community of people who are looking to do things for the community, both in the community, by the community, for and with the community. So I think what we should be all endeavoring to do is to have a community of winners. Not just one winner, not just one person, not just one group, because everybody here believes that they have a damn good idea about doing things, and there's a lot of doers here in this room. And we should all be trying to figure out how to work together so that we'll have not only just a community, but a community of winners that will go out. If we're a community of winners, we'll be able to help the community and the people we serve to be winners. So that would be my thing. And thanks, Dustin, for coming. So I want to personally thank everybody for coming, because we've been around a long time.
No, thank you. Anyone else? No? Well, this isn't. I'd say eight kind of regions, because like the Bay Area is all over the place, and there are other, I went to Albuquerque, but I was in different hubs within that, but I'd say like 8 different, yeah. So the path of my road trip, I started in my hometown of Aberdeen, Washington, and then I drove south down through Portland, then down through the Bay Area, then Phoenix, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, long haul up to Detroit, and then even though this part is USA themed, I did dip up into Canada for RightsCon, went to Toronto, and then I came down here, and this is my final stop before I head back to DC. One thing that this isn't really fully baked out in my mind yet, but Greta had this great image on her slide where there was a ladder up to the roof where they were putting satellites in, correct? Or wireless routers. And she had prior to that mentioned that the community networks or the initiatives that have failed are because somebody helicoptered in. So maybe the biggest takeaway from this is that if we're going to be putting connectivity on these rooftops, we need to provide the communities with the ladders and not just drop something down from a helicopter. Right. But other than that, thank you all. And I think what Joly and I can do is gather all of the resources that were shared today and follow up with some sort of email that kind of aggregates them and make sure that nothing's lost here.
What I'm likely going to have to do is to get Jane to do a repeat performance because we totally mangled her presentation.
No worries on that. But you know, what you guys could do also is talk to Mark and make sure we get you a spot on the North American Bureau's website.
Yeah.
We can host all the data. This was some of the stories here, or in just the community building, financing, whatever. Awesome, and really be inspirational for other people. And it's amazing how much everything that's going on in New York is also related to some of the places we're also working. So it's very cool.